Welcome, everyone. On behalf of the NPS Alumni Association Foundation, I would like to welcome you to this presentation. My name is Rich Patterson, and I serve as the CEO of the NPS Alumni Association Foundation. Our organization exists for the purpose of supporting research facilities, the alumni and student and faculty communities at NPS. Today, we're very pleased to have the opportunity to speak to the fourth industrial revolution, and we're privileged to have retired Lieutenant General Mike Dana with us. Just a couple rules of the day, if we could. Please keep your mics on mute during the presentation. We recommend you set your screen to speaker view. And if you'd like to offer a question, please send it to us via the chat feature, as we'll be monitoring that during our presentation. Our moderator today, as before, is retired Colonel Todd Lyons. It's my pleasure to introduce him. Todd currently serves as the Vice President of the NPS Alumni Association Foundation and is a volunteer instructor for innovation leadership at the Naval Postgraduate School. In this role, he bridges the divide between industry, academia, and DoD entities to accelerate the responsiveness of NPS to the challenges arising from the great power competition and emerging technology. Todd retired last year after 30 years in the Marine Corps and served as the Senior Marine Representative and the Associate Dean of Research at NPS in his final assignment. Over to you, Todd.
Rich, thank you so much. It's great to be here today, really talking about the fourth industrial revolution with Lieutenant General retired Michael Dana. He retired from being the Deputy Commandant for Installations and Logistics. He's probably most famously known for a video that went viral with him swimming through the Quigley at Quantico to show how innovation is done. And finally, he decided that it wasn't enough that he would spend most of his life in the Marine Corps. He actually moved to the 22nd most dangerous city in America to continue to be at the cutting edge. And so with that, I'd like to invite Lieutenant General Michael Dana and the fourth industrial revolution.
Hey, Todd, thank you. I'm not going to say what city it is because the mayor will get upset with me, because where I live is actually really nice. But I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to everybody today. Anytime I'm with the Naval Postgraduate School, I mean, the caliber of the staff, the faculty, the students is absolutely amazing. And it's just a privilege to be here today. I always enjoy visiting y'all. So warfare in the fourth industrial revolution. As I was putting my thoughts together for this talk today, first thing I realized is I'm getting pretty old, because I came in the Marine Corps, I raised my hand in 1979. And looking back over those 40 years, what's amazing is how much things have changed and how quickly they have changed, and especially today. And I say that because my anchor point or my context is the fact that I had a grandfather in World War I. I had 6 uncles in World War II. I had an uncle and a cousin in Vietnam. And if you look at warfare from that World War I to Vietnam era, though the tools of war evolve and change to a degree, it's all a reflection of that second industrial revolution. I mean, it's mass, strategic agility, and we just pummel our foes with a lot of fires and a lot of large armed forces. And then the other thing I was thinking about is I checked in the 2nd Tank Battalion in June of 1983. I'm dating myself because these tanks are now museum pieces, but I was on M60A1 tanks. And that was a tank like my uncle, really an A1 was not too different than an M48 or what my uncle drove around in World War II in that Sherman tank. The other thing that was kind of striking is when I checked into my platoon commander's office, which was about the size of a closet, no computer, no internet, no cell phone. But then just fast forward 7 years, and I'm with an infantry battalion, 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines, and we're in Desert Storm, and we're seeing the fruits of the third industrial revolution, because there's ISR, very good ISR, great integrated comms, and then the equivalent of the Blue Force tracker of the day, where you kind of track where everybody's at on the battlefield. So where I'm going with this, I would say from 1990 till today, it has literally been an exponential growth in the impact of technology. So Todd, next slide, please. So this leads into the American way of war. So 4 quick vignettes to show that that second industrial revolution, mass and strategic mobility and agility. So if you go back to the Civil War, 1864, 23rd Corps, 15,000 strong with all their kit, their wagons, their cannon, their horses. They're moved from northern Tennessee up, over, and down to an attack on Wilmington, North Carolina in 19 days. And that's before strategic airlift, that's before the interstate system, that's railroad, barge, and ship. 19 days, we moved that many people. We've always been good at strategic mobility. World War I, the Germans think it's going to take us 2 years to move 1 million men. We move 1 million in a year and 2 million by Armistice Day. Then World War II, which is really the pinnacle of what I call the Arsenal of Democracy, which is a great book, by the way. But if you look at World War II, we provide 2/3 of the war materiel for all the Allies and ourselves. 88,000 tanks, 303,000 aircraft, 2.4 million vehicles, and over 1 billion rounds of large caliber ammunition. That's American second industrial revolution industry at its best. In Vietnam, I had an uncle who flew in B-24s in the Southwest Pacific. They flew in B-52s in Vietnam. You look at tonnage dropped between those two conflicts. World War II, 2.1 million tons. Vietnam, 6 million tons. So we keep throwing mass at the problem. Sometimes it doesn't have the desired effect, but we're able to generate that mass due to our industry. So as we look at that way of war, I think it's important that we kind of frame the problem, or really frame the capability and the opportunity, is that second industrial revolution, 1850s to 1950s, roughly. And it's steel, railroad, electricity, internal combustion engine, gasoline and diesel. Eli Whitney's interchangeable parts, though he gets credit for that, and I'm not really sure he does when you read the history books. And then Ford's mass production line. So that's the arsenal of democracy with that second industrial revolution. Then third industrial revolution, it's semiconductors, mainframe computing, robotics, and then automation and manufacturing. And then later on, as you know, of course, we all live with today, internet and the great data capabilities that we have. Then the fourth industrial revolution, which we're right now in the throes of, it's additive manufacturing, 3D printing, artificial intelligence, machine learning, autonomous platforms, advanced robotics, bioengineering, genetic coding. All these, the confluence and the convergence of all these are going to shape our future way of war, just like it did in the conflicts of World War I, World War II, and in Vietnam. Next slide. So, and I'm really looking forward to some pushback on this during the Q&A, because I've pitched this before to several audiences and they don't totally agree with the 7 dimensions of warfare. But let's go back to something everybody can agree on. If you look at World War II, it is primarily a 3-dimension fight: sea, air, and land. And sea has a very important subsea component. Now, the communication folks get upset because I don't talk about cracking the German and Japanese codes and all the deception that went in. Yeah, I recognize all that. But at the end of the day, as you look at the sea, air, and land domains in both ends of the fight, we're bringing a lot of mass to bear, and we're doing that in those domains. And I'd say as we look to the future fight, it's not only going to be sea, air, and land, but space and cyber, the cognitive domain, and time. And the thing with the cognitive domain is that there's just so much information being thrown at us today that in terms of Boyd's OODA, observe, orient, decide, and act, that cognitive domain for ourselves and then for the people that we're going to be going against, who can ever process information the fastest, in my mind, will win. And then time, with machine learning and artificial intelligence, it's just, there's so much data being thrown at us, so much computing that the human mind can do, which is limited, and that machine can do, and we're always racing the clock. So I would say with the dimensions of warfare, there's really 3 things that jump out at me. First is that we continue to produce second industrial revolution machines that are highly expensive, exquisite, and complex. Now, they're very lethal, they're very capable, they project our nation's power, but they are also vulnerable, I believe, to fourth industrial revolution asymmetric weapon systems. And what I'm talking about is the F-35, a very capable aircraft, $89 million per copy. Columbia class submarine, $1 billion. Okay, a Ford aircraft class carrier, $13 billion. And there are weapon systems on the horizon that are much less expensive, much less complex, that could provide asymmetric threats to those capabilities. Second point is, in the future, the space and cyber domain will be decisive. Especially if you look at the cyber domain. There's a great show, 60 Minutes show, with Leslie Stahl, where a young hacker's in his laptop and he hacks into her car and shuts off the brakes. Think about cyber attacks against our electrical grid, our weapon systems definitely can be decisive in the future. Third thing is, with today's information systems and all the data that we have, I would argue that the existing, though evolved, Napoleonic and Prussian staff organization, that J1 through J10, G1 through G10, that organizational structure is a poor match for all the information systems, because what you want with information is actionable knowledge. So you have to take a lot of information and aggregate that data and information, analyze it, and distill it down to the commander to give him actionable knowledge. And I'd argue that the systems that we have today, though they're getting better, and I'm talking human process and hardware software systems, we're not there yet. Next slide. So, the fourth industrial revolution. I used to watch David Letterman. He had his top 10. I've got my top 5 that I'd like to walk through with you today. And there's more than these 5, but these are the 5 that I believe will be the most impactful. The first is additive manufacturing and 3D printing. Because in the previous design of our American way of war, it was factory to foxhole. What additive manufacturing and 3D printing, what the promise of that is, you can move the factory closer to the foxhole. In some cases, you can be next to the foxhole. We did some experimentation with the Marines. This is about 3 years ago, where we took Humvees, had mobile 3D printers, and they were printing, we have these handheld drones, they're called nibblers, and they're really kind of over the hill ISR capability. So we print those, they break, okay, it broke, toss it away, you print another one, assemble it. And you're doing that at the very pointy end. And that's an absolutely fantastic capability. And as you know, with 3D printing, you can print buildings. And one thing you think about in the Pacific is, if we have fixed installations, they're going to be very vulnerable to threat weapon systems. And everything that we do in the Marine Corps is maneuver and getting places quickly, setting up, operating, and then redeploying and going to another location quickly. So the promise of 3D printing in that scenario is you can print facilities, which has been done. If you look, you can Google it, you can see in Houston, they've made houses from 3D printing. This is all possible today. The other thing I really like about 3D printing, and this is because I'm a logistician, is we were constantly dealing with maintenance challenges in the Marine Corps for our legacy systems, LAVs, tanks, and AAVs. And the original equipment manufacturer could not provide the parts. But with a 3D printer, you can scan code, print the part, much less expensive, much faster. Now, there's a lot of proprietary concerns with that. Some folks get concerned that we're going outside the system, but I'd argue this is the new system that we want to use. So that is the promise of 3D printing. Next is autonomous platforms. And this is where I get really excited and I get really scared. Because as you look at the potential of unmanned aerial platforms, and these platforms are air, sea, and land. But as you look at air, in Afghanistan, we used a platform, and there's a picture of it there on the top in the center, KMAX. KMAX is 50s technology. In the 50s, early 60s, those were used in the American Northwest in an autonomous, actually there was a feeder cable that directed it, but it would lift logs in very rough terrain in the American Northwest. But what we did in Afghanistan is we used the KMAX for point-to-point logistics distribution. And it was highly effective. And the beauty of it was a human being had to actually start it. By the way, it was when I was in Afghanistan, a couple of Vietnam pilots who were really great to be around, and they'd start up the KMAX, step out, then the KMAX would do a point-to-point delivery of logistics. So if you take a system like that, you marry it with ACUS, which is a company that works with Carnegie Mellon, used to work several years ago. And ACUS is pilot in a box. And that system, it's with KMAX, and it's an aftermarket system. So you can put it on an Apache, you can put it on a Huey, you can put it on a Bell helicopter, you can put it on the whole family of rotary wing platforms. And what that ACUS can do is terrain avoidance, and it can also do, if there's you can get ISR feed to it, and then avoid the threat. That is absolutely a brilliant capability. Now, the flip side of those aerial drones and unmanned that really, really concerns me is drone swarms. So if you've seen the 60 Minutes episode with Will Roper, where they're launching drones from an F-18 at altitude, and they disaggregate and then aggregate and destroy the target on the ground. What Roper says in his interview is that capability will be as impactful on warfare as nuclear weapons. And at first I'm kind of going, wow, that's a high bar to cross. But if you think about it, if you take any country, any location, third, fourth, fifth generation aircraft that are parked in an airfield, and then through a delivery means, be it a jingle truck, a barge, a ship, another aircraft, and you launch 500 to 1,000 drones, and those have bomblets, you can attack an airfield and attack those aircraft, and for pennies on the dollar, make the damage or destroy those aircraft. So that's why, for the students, I mean, my first foot stomper is there's several anti-drone technologies out there, but I have not yet seen one or a family of systems that will defeat that threat. And that should be an absolute priority. So in the unmanned realm, air, that's very important. Second is unmanned subsea. And this is about 5 years ago, but Johns Hopkins produced a device called the Kraken. It's not the movie this is something separate, but it's a corrosion resistant drone that you could seed these on the littoral floor and then activate them. They could lift up out of the water and then go point of need. And the beauty of these drones, either air or subsea, is you can make them modular in design. I mean, we're not there yet, but you can, in terms of you can weaponize it, it can become an ISR platform, or it can provide logistics. So think about in the Pacific, in a littoral fight, the ability to take underwater drones, seed those along the littoral floor, then employ them to support your forces or to provide fires or to provide ISR. I think it's an absolutely great capability. Then last in the unmanned is the surface aspect. Let's talk vehicles. And I don't like, this is really being nitnoid and tactical, I don't like the lead follower terminology, because when you have a convoy of 25 vehicles, we'll likely have 1 to 2 vehicles that are manned, that will likely be embedded within the convoy, and then you're going to have autonomous front and rear, because that way you're maximizing the protective potential of those platforms, and then go from point A to point B. And that, for logistics, that has a lot of capability and a lot of potential. The same thing goes with barges at sea. I mean, you could have unmanned barges carrying unmanned vehicles. Same things could happen. So that's an absolutely fantastic capability. The next one, we're gonna have a lot of fun with, because this always leads to a really friction-laden debate, but it's artificial intelligence and machine learning. And I was lucky enough to go to school with several folks that were mechanical engineers and electrical engineers, and they're friends of mine to this day. And anytime we start talking AI and machine learning, they get very agitated and upset with me because of what I'm about to say. Is if you look at the 1997 Garry Kasparov chess match against IBM's Deep Blue, he loses. And when he loses, he's furious. Okay, he is absolutely apoplectic. And he is a very bright man and a very capable man. So he says that IBM was cheating. But then he does his own research and he realizes the machine beat him fair and square. And he comes to that epiphany in his book, Deep Thinking, which is well worth the read, Deep Thinking. And what he says in the book is, I'm really smart. The machine's really smart, but the machine and I together are going to be unstoppable. And this is what I think with artificial intelligence and machine learning, that man-machine teaming will provide a great advantage to any army and to especially hopefully here to the United States and our armed services. But I think the challenge is, and this is the debate, when you read about warfare, when you've experienced warfare, it's all about chaos and confusion. And the Marine Corps way to navigate that confusion is through maneuver warfare. The Army calls it mission command, which is we know the environment's going to be highly chaotic. We don't understand what's going on. But if we adhere to commander's intent and then use initiative and at the lower level, read things and figure out the battle and then exploit advantage, then we'll win. But in the background, at least since World War II, we've always thought that, maybe we can make order out of disorder. Maybe all this chaos can be boiled down and distilled into actionable knowledge. And what I'd argue is, in the think piece for this, because you always have to talk about a dead German general during a presentation, but in the left of the slide there, you see the book Order and Chaos, and that's written by Major General Hermann Balck, German Panzer Division commander in World War II, 6 times wounded in World War I. And then on the Eastern Front in World War II, he's like Michael Jordan, Babe Ruth. I mean, he loses a few battles, but he's got about a 90% win rate, and he's very, very effective. And one that stands out is during the Battle of Stalingrad, which, as you know, did not turn out well for the Sixth Army and the Germans. But he's outside the city kind of concentric defenses, and he is stopping a Russian tank corps from coming into Stalingrad. And in that battle, he's outnumbered, his unit, the Panzer Division, is outnumbered 11 to 1, and he wipes it out. Kills 1,000 T-34 tanks, renders the corps absolutely combat ineffective. And the thing about Balck is he had an innate sense for the battlefield, what we call a coup d'oeil. I mean, he understood the eye of the battle. He could see all things and kind of collate and bring that together. And he really made fantastic decisions. And what he says in his book, when asked, hey, how did you do that? He said, whenever faced with the same situation, I never did the same thing twice. So my point to this is, because of the human's mind's cognitive ability, intuition, judgment, experience, he's able to bring all those factors together and always win. But if today you gave that Russian Corps commander, if you gave him AI capability, machine learning, what would happen? Would he win or lose? And we'll never know. But I think we need to be very careful about how much in man-machine teaming is machine and what's man is do a very clear division of labor between those two. Next topic, and there's 2 more, and then we'll take questions, is, and I was using the wrong term in the past, but I used to call it post-humanism. But I think the correct term is transhumanism. And what transhumanism is essentially is biological, physical, mechanical enhancements to a human being to make them more effective, to make them smarter, faster, be able to lift more, think more. Think of the recent Nobel Prize with CRISPR, with gene editing, which in theory, if you take that to its logical conclusion, which has huge ethical and moral considerations, is you literally could breed, you could genetically code and create through enhancements, either physical, again, or medicinal, through various drugs. You pick the different science that's being explored today, and you could create super soldiers. And to me, that's very disconcerting. I mean, you read about it in science fiction, we watch it in movies, but that might be on the horizon in the next 20 or 30 years. The last one I have is hypersonics. So I've done a lot of research. I always like to read about World War II. So if you look at the Germans in World War II, they come up with the Me-262, they come up with the V-1 and the V-2. But the common theme between all 3 of those is that they're late to need. for a lot of reasons. But the V2, when it comes in 44 and 45, that kills over 10,000 Brits in the barrage campaign where they're launching these V2s. And that V2 is operating between Mach 2 and Mach 3. So if you think today in a modern battlefield, which is literally a global battlefield with hypersonics, and the advancements in metallurgy and where we're going with rocketry and jet engines and scramjets and all these different technologies, we foreseeably could go to Mach 5 and Mach 10. So what that does in terms of time distance, especially in the Pacific, is it's going to compress it. And what's concerning to me is that those systems are relatively expensive to produce, but not as big or expensive as the other systems I talked about. And if a foe is able to launch 20, 30 of these hypersonics at a force that we have, I don't think it'll turn out well for us unless we can come up with some type of defense against systems of that capability. So that in, I think I kept you at 15, a little bit more, 20 minutes, that's a very quick overview of all the industrial revolutions, our way of war, the dimensions of warfare. But I think the biggest foot stomper I want to leave with this audience today is everybody, when they look at combat and warfare, goes, you know, it's the physicality of it, it's the bravery, which of course is extremely important. It really is. But if you look back at World War II, you know, you look at what the scientists did in that conflict, and it is amazing in terms of the atomic bomb, you know, sonar, radar, all these different systems that were developed. It was scientists coming together and smart students, either through ops analysis or through just hard STEM, that gave us the systems that provide us a qualitative and quantitative edge in that conflict. And I would say that today we need folks in industry, in academia, especially at schools like NPS, MIT, Stanford, Carnegie Mellon, to come together to look at these hard problem sets that the fourth industrial revolution is going to create in future conflict and make sure we're ready for that challenge. So with that, Todd, that concludes my comments, and I'm eager for questions.
Outstanding. Thank you, sir. You've laid out a very expansive vision of the fourth industrial revolution and the opportunities it presents. I think part of the challenge for many of us is that this technological inflection point, because it's going to change everything, the question is, where do we start? And so the question for you, sir, is where do we start driving in the DoD to take advantage of these opportunities?
Yeah, I think that has a people aspect and an organizational aspect. And I was having a senior moment a second ago, because what I forgot to mention was in all that great scientific achievement in World War II, it was Vannevar Bush. I mean, if you Google Vannevar Bush, or if you read anything about how we mobilized and got ready for that World War II conflict, Vannevar Bush, his name's there. I mean, he is the connector bringing it all together. And I'd argue that Hondo Gertz in the Navy and Will Roper in the Air Force, they're the Vannevar Bushes of today. Because what you need in innovation or moving efforts like these forward, it's best to be bottom-up driven, where you're really getting the great ideas from the young officers enlisted. I mean, that's the most important part. But you need a top-down sponsor that has access to resources and can provide resources. So I think NPS can become an incubator for innovation, for looking at fourth industrial warfare and its implications. But I think what's absolutely critical is that that's got to be done, which I know you would do it this way. It has to be done in a collaborative manner, and it has to be team focused, and it can't be perceived as a threat to other people's resources. And by the way, in the Marine Corps, when we did next generation logistics, we kept that cell really small and we starved it of resources, because once you give a lot of resources, people and money, kind of people start looking and coming after you. So with NPS, what you can do with the incubators, you can start growing the ideas, but then create venues to bring people to think about these ideas and move forward. And then the other thing I'd say is creating that network of the younger officers enlisted is absolutely critical, because they've got fantastic ideas. And the thing is, senior folks have great ideas too, but it's great to create venues where you get the two of them together. And we used to do that with the Commandant of the Marine Corps, the Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps, and we would get a young Major, Chris Wood, or other young innovators in with them to pitch an idea. And one time, Chris pitched an idea, and the Assistant Commandant gave us a funding line to develop some of the unmanned platforms. So long answer to a short question, but I think NPS is the key. It's creating that community of interest, and it's leading from behind, and it's ensuring that the young ones have a voice and a vote in what we're producing. Thanks.
Thank
That's
you
all
so
I've got.
much. I want to turn now. We've got a couple of questions from some of our participants. One is Sheila Vadia from Lawrence Livermore National Labs. She now works with the Defense Innovation Unit. Sheila, what is your question? I don't know if she can hear. Tell you, we'll go to the next one. Captain Michael Gannon is a Marine Corps. Oh, Michael Gannon is a Marine Corps manpower officer in his second quarter at the Naval Postgraduate School studying manpower systems analysis. Captain Gannon, what is your question?
Sir, in the future you described, there will be substantial differences in the relationships between the military and the industrial sector. How will intellectual property rights, patents, contract rights be addressed to facilitate the closer relationship between companies and the military?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm not doing the old guy dodge the question, but let me just answer it this way. In 2016, I went to Las Vegas to the Consumer Electronics Show, which, by the way, post-COVID, all the young officers enlisted out there, just start banging on your CO's door and get a ticket to go to the CES, because it's an amazing innovation and engineering show, just the latest and greatest technology. But what was absolutely striking there is I spent 2 days walking around, and the Silicon Valley, Route 128, Chapel Hill folks, anybody that was anybody in terms of technology or a technology company, I was in civilian attire. And once they found out I was military, like, we don't want to talk to you. And these are the young startup guys. I'm not talking Microsoft and all the big ones. These are small companies. I said, why don't you want to talk to me? They said, too bureaucratic, too hard to work with, and you don't pay on time, and it takes too much time. So to your very good question is, I understand the reason for the federal acquisition regulations. I understand copyright law. I get all that. And I think Gertz and Roper, Mr. Gertz and Mr. Roper have done this to a degree, is you have to have the ability to fast track some of that stuff. That, hey, if this is really a cool idea that has a lot of impact on future war, when it comes to the copyright, when it comes to patent, when it comes to who's going to get a cut of the profit, there ought to be a mechanism to accelerate that faster. So that's kind of where I'm at. And I think what concerns me is the frustration level at your level, because you're working with folks that have really good ideas, and then what I call the bureaucracy, the board, shut you down. And all I would ask you, I'm begging you, don't quit. Keep smashing on the CO's hatch and keep floating those ideas and create your network to get these things moving. All right, Mike. So keep moving, keep pushing it.
Sir, I have one follow-up question. Given that answer and the thought process behind legal changes, what would be the potential political and economic ramifications of that when it comes to additive manufacturing? Now we're putting proprietary rights of something you own. How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, we had a process in the Marine Corps, as you know, where we would go through the very deliberate, time-consuming, but required process to either get the parts validated that they would work, that they were engineering safe, and then that we weren't violating, copyright laws, everything else. And what I failed here, what we never got to, is I wanted to use, I used the vertical pronoun once, sorry, okay, but in this case it is because I screwed it up, is what I wanted to do was turn it into an iTunes model. So when you download the music, okay, you pay for the music. Otherwise, you know, you're not paying for it. So we literally went to original equipment manufacturers and said, hey, every time we print a part, we'll give you a cut. I mean, we're not just going to start black market printing these things. We'll print and pay it, you know, every time we print one of your parts. And we just didn't, that's another one I did not make enough progress on. But I think that would be the model for the future, because additive manufacturing 3D printing is going to severely disrupt the current manufacturing paradigm. I mean, I think where that's going, by the way, quick tangent, is you kind of got the super gigafactories that Tesla's done, like the one up in Buffalo, and there's one in Berlin. You got the big, massive gigafactories. But what I think 3D printing is going to do is democratize manufacturing, where, you know, it kind of goes back to, you know, in Shakespeare's day, artisans, everything was distributed. Then, you know, 1900s, everything's under one roof. I think we're going to see things distributed a little bit more in the future. And I think companies will realize that, hey, as long as they're giving me a cut of the profit, if I'm designing this part and they're printing it, that's good enough.
Thank you, sir.
Well, that was fantastic. And, you know, part of what you're highlighting is it's not just technologies that we've got to innovate, but in fact, the way that we acquire and do things like that. And with that, I want to introduce First Lieutenant Ben Cohen. He's a Marine Corps logistics officer who is studying defense systems analysis at the Naval Postgraduate School. Lieutenant Cohen, what's your question?
General Dana, good afternoon, and thank you for your time. In particular, the conversations about artificial intelligence, transhumanism are very interesting directions that we could go. But I think it might take quite a while for that AI to reach the battalion and squadron levels because of the many implications involved. And so I wonder if in the interim, augmented reality systems have perhaps been glossed over and we have lost an opportunity to implement that technology. And should we be considering investing more in standalone AR systems for those single or small celled Marines or sailors to execute? So in essence, what I'm asking, sir, is can we and should we use AR to enable the strategic logistic corporal?
Yeah, are you talking augmented reality in terms of being able to run them through various scenarios, or to literally have a digital twin depiction of what's going on with the equipment, stockage levels, that type of thing?
More the second example, sir. I think a good conversation is the HoloLens and the ability for a single Marine to employ the HoloLens and take a look at the bulk break that needs to move, or understand how they can organize within an HST or a C-130 and visualize and put that piece together to allow for really efficient movement and placement of goods instead of the let's load unload 20 times. Yeah.
Make that your thesis. I mean, I think that's a fantastic idea. I mean, it really is, because the thing we struggle with at Headquarters Marine Corps and INL, no names here, by the way, but I'm just going to tell you the scenarios. We, Kevin Stewart and I, Dave Maxwell, we brought in a lot of folks in the building and said, hey, if you look at from point of embarkation to point of debarkation to in the field at the very pointy end, there's a lot of gaps. I mean, nothing, you know all this, you lived it, and I remember meeting you once, and I know you're really smart, just like Mike, and you know this, but what I said was, hey, there's a lot of gaps here, and with technology, for instance, like, in Afghanistan, your last visible point in the battlefield was the last scanner at the FOB. But then once it went out into that infantry battalion, it just may as well fallen off the edge of the earth. So I said, instead of, we always engineer logistics C2 systems for higher headquarters. I mean, that's kind of where we start. And I think in the future, what we ought to do is you look at the pointy end and then reverse engineer it all the way back. And all those gaps and seams that you have in the logistics pipeline, that you're mending those gaps with sensors, with AR, you know, with systems that, you know, will collect that information and give you real-time reports. And, you know, it's not, how we move logistics in Afghanistan at the end of the day wasn't very different than when I was in Desert Storm. I mean, and that's an indictment on the system. And this is nothing you don't know also, but Then the systems we do get, and I'll say this publicly, probably get yelled at by the company, but GCSS Marine Corps, I mean, that is 20th century technology ill-suited for the current battlefield. I mean, and the problem is, as you know, with IT systems, they are incredibly expensive. And then once you're in, it's kind of like The Godfather, they suck you back in. I mean, once they got you, I mean, it's hard to completely break away because of all the sunk costs. So I'm passionate about that topic because we never got it right, in terms of making sure that we sealed those gaps. So great question.
Thank you again, sir.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant Cohen. Really appreciate that. I now want to invite Sheila Vadya to ask her question. Sheila is retired from Lawrence Livermore National Labs and now works with the Defense Innovation Unit. Sheila, would you like to ask your question?
Absolutely. Hello, General Dana. How are you?
Hi, Sheila.
So the quick question from me is, I'm going to pick on one of the limbs of your industrial revolution, and that is autonomous systems. So let's just take this example of the swarm, whether it's underwater or above. What do you think the biggest risk is, especially from a DoD perspective, of implementing these kinds of technologies?
Yeah, that's a great question. Great question. So I'd say the first thing they can be hacked, and that really concerns me. And I think I touched on it a little bit, but I need to really emphasize it is in that cyber domain, the ability to turn the lights off or redirect a weapon system or turn off a weapon system. I mean, that to me is very disconcerting because, an old conflict, I say old, Second Industrial Revolution, you destroy things by blowing them up. Today with cyber, you can just turn them off or redirect them, or even what's scarier is in a command and control depiction, you can make your foe see something that's not reality. In theory. I mean, that's where we'd want to go. So number one, I said they can be hacked. The second one, and I'm dating myself and some of the young majors are going to go, what's he talking about? But it's the HAL 2001 Space Odyssey. And what I mean by that is, if it gets a mind of its own, because if you use those type of systems, the beauty of them is that it's to a degree of fire and forget. And you want trust in the system that what you're telling it to go fire and kill is what it's going to do. But if it doesn't do that, or there's erratic actions, or the swarm does something different, that's not good. And the other thing I'd say is, as a planner, when I was in the Pacific Command, and this isn't any combined command, is a lot of your strategy that you develop is to escalate to de-escalate. So in other words, if you're in a conflict, you're going to tell the enemy, hey, you know what, I'm taking it to this level and you're going to back down. And my concern with autonomous platforms and AI and machine learning is if that's moving at machine speed, it's going to get really hard for humans to get in the loop on it, and it might get away from us. And what I'm specifically saying is for nuclear weapons, because if you look at how nuclear weapons are controlled today, there's a lot of human in the loop. But if you're using autonomous platforms, and especially autonomous platforms that target command and control centers and other things that also have a dual responsibility of controlling the nuke force, to me, that would be highly destabilizing and a concern. So how you keep a human in the loop on it, to me, is the hard part. And the other, I've mentioned this in other briefs, it's really quick, but great book, Mozart's Brain and the Fighter Pilot, excuse me. And it talks about how every human being has a set limit of cognitive ability. I mean, they only can process so much. I mean, even General Balk, or even yourself, or Todd, and Mike, and Ben, I mean, you guys are great. You can process a lot real fast, but the machine's going to process it faster. And the machine's as good as the algorithms and the biases that you put into the algorithms to sift and sort data and do things. And I just think that can get, I go back to HAL 2001 Space Odyssey. And if the machine's not properly programmed, you're going to be in trouble. Over to you.
Okay, so can I, Todd, with your permission, can I have a follow-up question?
Sure.
Absolutely.
Okay. So I want to pick on another limb because I think you just touched on it, and that is your AI machine learning limb. Now, lot of our interest is going away from information warfare, this is what I'm reading, to information advantage. Because the enemy can destabilize us by exactly the tools you're talking about, by hacking, by introducing malware into our C2 systems and essentially break our knees even before we can get started. So is there really going to be an equal weight given to the heavy machinery, the aircraft carriers and that side of the house versus what we did, for example, with Stuxnet and Iran? You know, the
right.
So how do you?
Oops, Sheila, you froze.
So this is the challenge. So based on what she was saying,
that was my question. How do you see the preamble where they stabilize us through software techniques versus the heavy machinery side of the house?
So Sheila, you were broken up a little bit. Todd, did you hear it all?
Sorry?
I did not. You broke up a little bit, Sheila, in your discussion. Can you give the short version of that?
Yes. So we are still pushing hard on the heavy system aspects of warfare. And my question is, the enemy can destabilize us early in the game by introducing malware in our C2 and such like we did, for example, with the centrifuges in Iran. So how do we marry these two concepts and move ahead?
I'm gonna go on a tangent, then I'm gonna come back. I think as you look at these systems and information systems and the biases and all that, I'm gonna get to your question in a second. But I'd recommend the book In the Swarm: Digital Prospects, and then Post-Truth by McIntyre. And what it talks about is how in today's internet information-laden world that perceptions can be this is obviously, we see it every day, but perceptions can be shaped and actions can be committed that will cause behavior that is really not what we want, but very disruptive. I mean, think about Russian meddling in our elections, that type of thing. Mm-hmm. So where I'm going with that is that as you looked at those domains of warfare, is that the heavy metal, junk, and steel is still important, but it's all see, this is what really worries me, is everything is networked and integrated. And if that is going to be vulnerable, because I've had this argument with Vince Stewart, who's very bright in this world. He's a cyber expert. He's a great human being, but he and I have gone back and forth on it. But we agree that any system that you have is going to there's going to be an infiltration. The key is how quick can you regenerate your capability, and then how much damage can you take, while your system's open or not doing what it's supposed to, for lack of a better term. And this is a great segue to, again, the schoolhouse and what you do and the students is, as you look at Zabrowski's network-centric warfare, like back the concept decades ago, and how it's evolved and matured and actually kind of almost there, except the staff system's not right, is what do we develop for tools that are layered and complementary to stop what you just said? Because once they're in your network, to me, that's literally, not to overstate it, but it's an existential threat. At the end of the day, I mean, just because it's the book that the two Chinese colonels wrote in the late 90s, but it was unrestricted warfare. And what they talked about was that it's just not going to be carrier against carrier, it's going to be cyber attacks. It's going to be, doing an attack on the stock market in New York. It's going to be shutting down the electric grid in California. I mean, it's all the tools at their disposal to defeat us. It's just not, nice and sanitary, maybe the wrong term, but World War II, where we're insulated, two-ocean war, boom. No, today it's going to be, hey, my refrigerator's turned off, the electric grid in Arizona just shut down, now what? So thanks, great question.
Thank you so much. I'm now going to move to a bunch of the questions that have been coming up in the chat that a ton of people are really interested in. I want to go to one from Major Jack Long. He says, if young officers have such good ideas, where have they been for the past 10 to 15 years? And why did so few bubble up? What's different now that's going to help make them stick?
Yeah, that's a That's a fantastic question. The key is finding a sponsor and somebody that will, this will sound wrong, but I'm being Marine on you, somebody that will tolerate just a complete left brain, right brain, completely different way of thinking. Because what tends to happen, there's a great book, it's called Organization Man. And what it talks about is in that second industrial revolution where, you know, everybody in management's kind of, you know, stamped, don't, you know, and they're all trying to, they're not innovative. They just cogs in the machine. And where I'm going with this is rebels in the Marine Corps. If you find a sponsor, you'll be protected and you'll be saved. And again, I'm using the vertical pronoun too much, but we had a team of folks that I was able to kind of help and protect. But then they got really frustrated. One of them actually went to the Air Force because they got tired of the Marine Corps bureaucracy. But if you have a sponsor, because if you look in the Marine Corps history, Pete Ellis, Krulak, the elder, I mean, the younger was fine too, but the elder was a thinking man. I mean, he, in terms of landing craft, come up with things like that. But they each had sponsors. And it's not a Marine Corps example, but I'll give you a fantastic other example is John Boyd. And I strongly recommend reading the recent biography on him because he was out of control in terms of crazy new ideas, bucking the system, torquing people off. But he had two general officers in the Air Force that took care of him. And then he jumped ship as a colonel, then literally came to the Marine Corps and gave us a lot of our information or insights into maneuver warfare. And by the way, Google Boyd's Patterns of Warfare brief. It's online. I think that should be required reading for every MPS student because he goes through the character of warfare and everything that's there. But to come back to your question is you need a sponsor. And you got to navigate wisely because I'll just say this, and you know this, probably see it in the Marine Corps senior ranks. I'll say that's colonels and above. There's three kinds. There's kinds that are about 30 years behind, but they're brave and they do what they need to do, and they're really good. Then there's the middle, and then there's the ones like Todd Lyons, okay, that are innovative, that think outside the box, that are receptive to new ideas, that'll put their arm around a young officer. So they're out there, you just got to find them. And it's that thing that I was told as a young officer is, when you're a younger officer, you're in tall grass with elephants. And you got to navigate it and find a friendly bull elephant.
Outstanding. Thank you, sir. I now want to go to a question from Zacharias Dentes. His question is really about the impact of hypersonics in the Pacific and the impact that the U.S. is trying to create with a hypersonic missile that can outdistance, outspeed, and outmaneuver some of the more recent Chinese cruise missiles at Mach 4+, and how that might change the need for the Navy and the Marine Corps to engage in expeditionary advanced base operations in the Pacific. Or if we think that because there are those hypersonic missiles, we can go back to what he calls the bread and butter amphibious ready group Marine Expeditionary Unit construct.
Well, this would be a great project, I think, at the schoolhouse. I think what's needed is literally a clean whiteboard. And if you did an IPB of the threat environment in the Pacific 20 years from now, give it your best guess, with hypersonics, with autonomous, with AI, machine learning, all these new capabilities, because I think what you would come up with is that the naval force, in terms of composition, configuration, and geographic placement, would be very different. And what is a little challenging is if you look at the United States Navy in the 1920s, they used to convene this thing called the General Board, even though it was admirals. But they were brilliant men. They were just completely on top of their game. And they designed the World War II Navy because the Washington Naval Treaty. They realized that, hey, whatever you had in the Pacific, that's all you had. You couldn't get more in terms of islands. So they had to turn it into instead of a coaling station Navy to a blue water Navy. And they designed that whole Navy with sub-tenders, with destroyer tenders, with everything. They figured that out. And where I'm going with that is today, I think we need that type of board to look at the future. And that board can be majors and lieutenant commanders and commanders, is look at that future threat environment and the vast array of capabilities that's going to be in that environment across those 7 domains. And you can get rid of time if you want in cognitive, but as long as you're touching space and cyber. And then how would you build a naval expeditionary force if you're reverse engineering it from that threat environment? Because I think all we're doing today is adding more stuff to the current systems that we have. And then we're going, oh my God, hypersonics, that's a problem. Are we going to be able to survive? Because there's another book I'd ask you to read, is Yellow Smoke by General Scales. He talks about future land warfare, but it's actually applicable to littoral warfare. And he talks about on all these technologies on how it's going to change the size of a unit. I mean, instead of infantry battalions, we might go down to super squads, and they're going to be distributed. I mean, we've played with some of this stuff before, but I think that would be a really cool project to lay that IPB reverse engineer from the threat environment on what a naval expeditionary force would look like. And I bet you it doesn't look anything like what we got today. Because in World War II, we had 5,000 ships, gray and black bottom. And now we've got a very few expensive suite of ships. And to me, we're going to need to be distributed. We're going to need to be able to hide in plain sight. We're going to need a lot of different platforms, blend of manned and unmanned, to get through this next fight. Because if you got one big target, I think we're in trouble. So please do that project.
Sure. Thank you so much. Again, the insights that you're offering us are incredible. One of the things that you said earlier that I want to come back to is the idea of the decisive battle being in space and in cyber, which almost inherently means that in this case, the Marine forces are going to be a supporting effort rather than the supported effort. How did that change the conversation within the Marine Corps and the Department of Defense as they think about, the cyber as the supported force and the actual force as the supporting force?
Yeah, I think the thing is, this relates to it, but I don't want to forget this thought is, I think what Marines bring to the table is that if you killed our comms and you killed a lot of the systems, we still operate pretty well. Because it's the mission command maneuver type mindset. So I think what the Marine Corps has to advertise is, hey, even in that type of environment, I guess the general mass talking about know how to read I'm being very simplistic here, but know how to read a compass, how to read a map, that type of thing. But, take that to a PhD level across all warfighting functions. And I think that's what the Marine Corps, we can fight in a networked environment and be plugged into that network. But if you detach us from that, we're still going to close with destroy the enemy and take the hill and do what we need to do. And I don't mean that in a Iwo Jima, John Wayne way. I mean it in a, hey, we've been blinded, ISR, so to speak. We can still go out there and operate and do what we have to do. And then I think on the supporting would be at the end of the day, I'm going to sound like I'm 60, is at the end of the day, you need boots on soil. Yeah. And you need that ability to influence at a different level. And take the lessons of counterinsurgency, but scale it up to like a Korean War level thing where you got to have boots on the ground, making an impact and doing things. They can still do things without being plugged into the machine. That one I got to think about a little bit more. So that was a good question.
Thanks, sir. Do you have time for a couple more questions?
I do. And if you don't mind, I've got one other book to recommend, but then I'm ready for another question.
So that was going to be one of the questions, which is, if you had to propose one book, you've already given us a bunch to read, but if there was one book that you would invite all of us to read out of this, what would it be?
All right, I'm going to cheat, and I'll send this to you later. So I'm doing the typical Marine thing. You're going to say, give me one. I'm going to give you three. So first one would be Klaus Schwab, World Economic Forum. He wrote the book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution. For the parents out there, your high school senior, and for the PhDs out there and everything in between, you read that book, you've got a great grasp of what the elements are and the direction of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. It's a very well written book, number one. Second, I talked about it was Yellow Smoke, The Future of Land Warfare, General Robert Scales. He's way before his time because he's thinking about where we're heading. Now, I'm not gonna lie, this next one, I'm only halfway through it, and it's really hard to read, but it's a scientific way of war. And then the adjoining book is The Eye of War, and it's by Antoine, I'm gonna kill the name, Bosquet, but it's Bousquet. And what he does is he takes von Creveld and some other folks and really thinks through the impact of technology on future war. So, because there's really bright young students there at NPS, those two books I think would be important because he does it through he's an engineer mindset kind of person. He does it through a STEM lens. Like when I talk to you today, it's through a political science lens. He talks it through a STEM lens, which is clearer in the connections to the impact of that technology that a technologist or an engineer or an ops analyst, it would resonate with them more, I believe. So those are my three.
Outstanding, sir. I want to go to a question from Adam Dietrich. He says, from your perspective, what structure changes are required to better align the military operational specialties and training to help ensure that young Marines and sailors are training to better team with those intelligent machines to accomplish and overcome future challenges in the cognitive domain?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is Mike Dana opinion, not the opinion of the Marine Corps. In fact, I'd be burned at the stake if I was in uniform saying this. Even though I said it in uniform, people didn't like it. I think if you look at the Marine Corps, it's again the vestiges of the Second Industrial Revolution, because even in World War II, the Marine Corps drafted people. Everybody says, hey, we're always all volunteer. No, we drafted in World War II. But it's that mass conscript Army, Navy, Army, Air Corps. I mean, it's just cogs, thousands of them, millions. Literally in World War II, millions. 17 million in uniform, 2/3 of those go overseas. But I think in the future fight, to where you're getting at is, I proposed this and it got shot down, as you would expect, is I think you can, to a degree, MARSOC the Marine Corps. And by the way, I think the flip side is that the MARSOC eats a lot of talent out of the Marine Corps, and for lack of better terms, lowers the performance bar of infantry battalions. And I got 5 years in infantry battalion, so I think I can say that. So if you take really the cream of the crop and you make the Marine Corps, instead of us being, and we've bounced anywhere from 500,000 in World War II to, before World War II, we were down to 35,000. And we've fluctuated all the way in between. But today, I think you could take the Marine Corps down to 150, 135. And then you raise the recruiting standards and you go after the absolute best and brightest, because we've made mission every month since the mid-90s. And then you're picking exactly what you talked about, is these people that understand these technologies. And what you'd want to do is create some specialists, but a lot of strong generalists that know how to bring all these tools to fruition. Because again, battalion, company, squad, platoon, squad, size of those, to me, this is what Scales says in his book, is those can be made much smaller because of their access to all the different systems. And bear with this tangent, but I think it's important, is if you look at Vietnam, there was a concept called Stingray. And if you Google Stingray, it'll bring it up. And these were force recon teams specifically tailored for deep insertion along the North Vietnamese lines of communication, in the deep hinterland. And they were very effective until they lost comms, because it's 60s technology. And that's why a lot of them literally got Navy crosses. But today, with how secure comms can be in a distributed fight like that, I mean, you could literally have MARSOC level squads or company minuses out there that have all these skill sets. The same goes for the Army. In fact, the Army's probably doing the same thing. You could really change the composition, flavor, and, for lack of a better term, quality of the people. And I mean quality in terms of technological knowledge and ability to, you know, use and leverage all these systems. So that's where I said, let's get smaller and let's introduce more technology. But, you know, once you do that, then you start losing money and the whole thing starts unraveling to a degree. So hopefully that helps.
No, absolutely. And the follow on to that, which I think is actually to your point, is, you know, how do we start to initiate the staff changes? You talked about this a little bit earlier, that the Napoleonic staffing system was not well suited. How do we start to initiate those staff changes to shape the future force, to ensure innovation and the ability to effectively fight in each one of those 7 domains?
I think what you look at, Todd, is if you look at what Admiral Stavridis did at Southcom to reconfigure that headquarters, and he's brilliant. He's a brilliant man. But for Haiti, when we went down for that op, that staff couldn't really process the information in a way that was conducive to executing the operation. I'll just say it that way. So I think in terms of like left and right lateral limit, it's like, here's CENTCOM the way they are today. And then here's how Southcom was back in 2010. And the staff design somewhere in the middle. And I know I keep throwing the problem back at you, but I would say that's another great NPS thesis, is that in this era of just overwhelming data and information, where you're trying to generate, make the observe, orient, decide, act loop move at machine speed, what staff design supports that? Because in the War on the Rocks article, you know, where I talk about this, I got a lot of hate now from people saying, hey, you criticize the staff, but what's that staff look like? And I think what that staff would look like is a blend of what Admiral Stavridis did, a little bit of what exists today, and then you'd go to somebody like Microsoft or I'll get it to you. It's a company in Northern Virginia that does data analytics, and it does it in a way that is very user-friendly and very fast, but it's also extremely expensive. But they have a method where they're able to aggregate information very quickly, and then on the fly, put in, you know, different queries or, you know, business rules where, you know, the machine's moving really fast. So that one's, I tell you what, I'd love to be a senior advisor for one of the students that does that project. I'd be all about it.
So our MPS students, you've heard it now. He's committed to being your senior advisor for each and every one of you. No, I'm kidding. Sir, I do want to thank you so much for taking time today to talk to us. It was a real tour de force, and I think it really opened up a lot of avenues for our students. I will commit that to everyone that's online, we'll follow up with a recommended reading list from Lieutenant General Dana, so that you can make sure that you captured the insights. And if you didn't capture the not so subtle hint, which is if you're not reading, you're functionally illiterate, that's probably the biggest takeaway that we could have from today. So, sir, again, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks. And just one last quick comment, and this is really for all the students and those in uniform. I've been out of uniform for a year. And there are times in the machine when I got really frustrated with the machine and, oh, you know, what's going on? I'm going to tell you what, I miss it more than I can put in words. And what I miss most is the people and the caliber of the people. So even if you had that platoon where like 10 guys were really driving you crazy, or 10 gals, trust me, they're wonderful compared to, once you get out, it's an eye opener. Just cherish every day that you're wearing that uniform. Thanks, Todd.
Outstanding. Thank you, sir. And now I'll turn it back over to Rich Patterson to take us out. Rich?
Thank you very much, Todd. And thank you, General Dana. Really appreciate your time today, and you and Todd putting together such an enlightening and thought-provoking presentation. I know the audience enjoyed it, and hopefully there'll be people going online and ordering some of those books right away. I'd like to alert the audience to a couple upcoming presentations. The first to be held on October 13th at 10 a.m. Pacific time is under the umbrella of the NPS Secretary Guest Lecture Series, and will feature retired Lieutenant General Jack Shanahan. He is the inaugural director of the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, and Mr. Nan Mulchandani, the acting director of the U.S. Department of Defense Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, and they will be speaking on the topic of harnessing AI for national security. You can go to the NPS website to get more information on that. The second upcoming program you should be aware of will take place on October 29th at 3 p.m. Pacific. This is under the umbrella of the NPS Foundation. It will feature Paul Shar, a senior fellow and director of technology and national security program at the Center for New American Security, and the author of Army of None. And also Dr. Ray Bittner. Ray is Associate Professor of Information Sciences and the Director for the Consortium for Robotics and Unmanned Systems Education and Research at MPS. Paul and Ray will be speaking on the topic of the war for autonomy. So again, hope everybody enjoyed the presentation today. Really appreciate you being here again. Thank you, General Dana. Thank you, Todd, for your great program. And we look forward to seeing everybody next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.